I was a brown kid in an all-white neighbourhood growing up, very much an outsider, whereas the boxing gym was the one place where it didn't matter where you came from.
Can someone be resilient if they've never been punched in the face?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
All the brands that came before us, the Everlast, the Lonsdales, they very much just focused on the end result of boxing. It was the boots, gloves, shorts. No one ever talked about the journey of boxing, and more so, everything they made looked like ass.
Do you know anyone that's just released a book on resilience?
well, funny you should mention it, Brian.
Can anyone be an entrepreneur? How do you start a business?
I think
Welcome to the Lead Out Loud podcast from Warwick Business School that brings leaders and academics together in conversation to explore what it takes to succeed in business and in life. In today's episode, we're talking about boxing, branding, and bouncing back. To help a knockout blow, we're joined by Amanna, founder and CEO of BOXRAW, and Professor Laura Chamberlain, a marketing expert here at WBS. So every great fight and every great business story starts with a few warm-up jabs. So let's kick things off with our rapid resume. A dozen questions to get to know you both a little bit better. So Laura, we'll start with you. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
coffee,
Emails or phone calls?
Phone calls.
phone calls,
Working from home or in the office?
Working from home.
office,
Standing desk or sitting?
Sitting.
sitting,
Time for breakfast or on the go?
Oh, I've got kids, so on the go.
on the go,
Messy or organised workplace?
Organised chaos.
ditto, organised chaos,
Early bird or night owl?
Oh, I used to be a night owl, but now I'm an early bird.
both at the same time, yeah.
Take the risk or play it safe?
Can I say both?
Risk,
Plan out or go with the flow?
Oh, definitely a planner.
planned,
Biggest role model?
I would say my parent.
ditto, my parents.
Best song for motivation?
Oh, Alicia Keys, Girl on Fire.
Eminem, lose yourself.
And if you weren't doing this job, what would you be doing?
Well, my backup plan when I was younger was always an air hostess, but I think now I would say writer.
Some business in space, the space field.
So now we do know you a little bit better. I'm quite interested in boxing in its entirety, and we'll get into how you got your business going a little bit later. But just to start off then, when you hear about boxing, it's, maybe new research has come out that there's a new injury or, it's quite, obviously it's competitive, but then it's the aggression side. Lots of people have quite strong feelings against it. And then there's the other side, which you hear about the community and the space that it has. So how would you describe that? Why do people still engage with boxing as a sport?
Yeah, it's an interesting angle people take when they refer about, the aggression side and is it good for people? It's controlled aggression, first of all, right? It's not aimlessly going into a ring and trying to take people's heads off. You see it in school as well, and in the community, is that the kids in the street get into fights and, involved in a riffraff. They're not ones that come from a boxing gym. When you get brought up in a boxing environment, you very quickly realise actually what you're capable of doing. And it allows you to control your aggression, and not react with anger. So I think that's a huge misconception, off the bat when people try and make the correlation with, is it good for people? It's very aggressive, being punched in the face. It's like, in a competitive environment, it's very controlled, and it's fair. And to a degree, it can be safer than other sports when you're doing it in a controlled environment with head guards, bigger gloves, and so on. But I think what you can take outside of boxing, away from just the physicality, is so beneficial for people, globally, that it should be, looked at in a serious capacity.
So thinking about particularly then younger audiences and people kind of starting off getting involved, what do you think the appeal is?
It's hard for me to know the appeal. I haven't done research in and amongst the gyms, right? I can speak from first hand. I got into boxing so I could just learn how to fight. I wanted to stand up to bullies. There was a lot of bullying going on when I was a kid, in school, outside of school. And for me, what I recognised was in the streets, there was three types of people that commanded respect. Those who could fight, those who dealt drugs, or those who stole stuff and had money from that. I didn't want to do the second or the third one. So to me, I was like, actually, let me learn how to fight. So yeah, I joined the boxing gym, and within months, I was able to, I wouldn't even say that I'm a great fighter at that point, but I was able to walk through the streets with this air of confidence, and it gave me the confidence to handle certain situations differently, and I think that gained the respect of people that typically tried to pick on me. So for me, that's what it did for me. I think for other kids as well, it's a place of actual community. I was a brown kid in an all-white neighbourhood growing up, very much an outsider, whereas the boxing gym was the one place where it didn't matter where you came from. All that mattered was where you were headed. And to me, that boxing gym became like a second home to me. You know, I loved going there every single day after school, even working there from the age of 15, because they judged you based on where you were headed and the effort you put in that environment. And you didn't get that in school. You know, in school, obviously your grades, your teachers can judge you, but in the streets or in, you know, certain gangs and so on, it's not about how much effort you put in. It's about status and other things that you bring to the table. Whereas the grind, the controlled work ethic that I put in that moment, that was something I could control. And that therefore, you know, gave me a lot more respect in the environment of the gym.
That's really interesting. I mean, Laura, I don't suppose this is something that you have much experience with. You did confess you don't know much about boxing. Me neither. But as a parent, if your kids came to you and said, I want to start boxing, what do you think your reaction would be, if any?
I'd say yes, of course. I mean, the thing I was thinking about when you were just talking, Ben, was the discipline element to boxing. And I think that's true with many different sports. And I can imagine I would have the usual concerns about, you know, the aggressive side of things and the physicality of the sport, which mum wouldn't, you know. But I think, you know, when I work with young people at the university and I look at the things that have shaped them through their lives, learning how to be part of a team, for example, things like discipline, the power of practice, and things like that, it's so hugely beneficial. And I'm not a boxer by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been engaged in different types of sport throughout my life, and music as well was something that I was engaged in as a child. And there are similarities there in terms of sort of the power of practice and discipline and that community element as well. And I think those things are incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And so what we'd call sort of extracurricular activities outside of the school, I think, you know, these are hugely important for kids as they grow up and develop.
And it's interesting you touch on the community and discipline side as well, because it sounds, Ben, like, you know, the three options that you just gave and you went for boxing, and then there was that space then for you. Do you think that's quite a common decision, a common way that people end up in as part of that community? Do you think they're faced with a similar sort of question?
Yeah, I think a lot of boxers enjoy some sort of hardship, right? Ultimately, it's a tough sport, but especially, you know, when you've got the community gyms in the areas where actually there isn't a lot going on. Yes, it's the side of, okay, one learning how to fight, which is cool, it's empowering, right? It's not necessarily just learning how to fight, it's knowing how to use your body weight to commit power. When you start to realize that, there's no more empowered feeling you can get from any other sport, you know, like getting a ball in a goal or, you know, through a net, you know, whatever it might be. Actually being able to use your fist and be able to land power and understanding biomechanics of how the lower body relates to the upper body, it feels great. So I think, yeah, it's a combination of those things. And also just the brotherhood almost that comes out from a boxing gym. You know, you can go toe to toe in sparring with someone and you walk out of the ring and you're still friends. And that feeling, I remember watching people before I started sparring in the gym, you know, they were going head to head and then afterwards they were laughing and joking. I could never really comprehend the idea of being able to inflict violence, if you like, on someone. And then afterwards, you know, no, this is just strictly business. But the bond that's forged from that is greater than anything else.
Yeah. And especially at the age that you were when you started getting involved. So how did that then turn into what has now become your career? So talk us through the phase. You said you started working at the gym when you were 15. So how did you end up where you are now? Yeah,
so it's off the back of like multiple failed business attempts, you know, things that worked, things that didn't work. I was always involved in business from a young age without really knowing it was business, from selling sweets in school at the age of 12 to by 15 on Alibaba. You know, I was importing. I had a dropshipping business without realizing it was dropshipping, you know, at the time. So, you know, I'd be getting MP4 players, microwaves, DVD players, white good appliances, selling them to independent stores across the UK. And boxing was always a recurring theme, from working at the gym, becoming a personal trainer, to then at university, starting a boxing club, that becoming its own business in and of itself through the classes we did and the events that we did. I tried my hand at every type of business, honestly, you can think of, from import-export, car sales, a mechanic, mobile phone apps. And it was very much off the back of we had a social media app, which I spent about 18 months working on. And about 5 days into launch, two other co-founders said that they wanted to slow down and essentially give up. I remember I was super depressed at the time and I was training for a fight, getting back into boxing. And I was running down the street, I was wearing this Adidas tracksuit. And I remember when I got back to the gym, I remember just thinking as I was on the bike cooling down, I wish that people knew that I was training for a fight. right? But they would have no idea that I'm a boxer by what I was wearing. And I'm starting to think more into it, recognizing actually there isn't a brand that represents boxing. All the brands that came before us, the Everlast, the Lonsdales, they very much just focused on the end result of boxing. You know, it was the boots, gloves, shorts. No one ever talked about the journey of boxing. And more so, everything they made looked like ass, you know, essentially. So I recognized there was a gap there. And I was starting to think bigger and into looking through the history of previous sports brands. And you recognize that every major sports brand starts off with a niche sport. Nike athletics, Under Armour American football, Adidas soccer, Vans skateboarding, you know, Moncler skiing. It's been done with every major sports niche in history, apart from boxing. But the difference now is that we're at the start of a golden era of boxing. And I recognized that because when I was at university, the club that we had by the third year had over 970 members. Over 70-80% were female. And this was at a time where boxing wasn't a thing for women, you know, but I was able to tell them on the idea at the time of, look, you can come to these boxing classes and you don't actually have to get hit in the head. You know, you can just learn how to use your body to throw punches, and you'll find it empowering. And they loved it, you know, so that then coupled along with the fact that I was selling these hoodies at university that said University of Bristol Amateur Boxing Club, had them printed here in Coventry, sold them at uni for like £60, and they went like hotcakes, you know, and people joining the club to pay the term fees, buying the hoodie and not coming back to training because they wanted to be seen as a boxer. So I'm just thinking, at the time I was annoyed. It wasn't until, you know, years later I'm then thinking, actually, boxing's that sport. If you do it, you're proud to do it. You know, you're proud to tell the world that you do it. It actually was missing something that highlighted the community aspect. You know, as I looked at boxing in the market, it was so misunderstood. Even the conversation, you know, we just had, you know, is that there's that idea that boxing has to be something very aggressive, only for the few that want to, you know, compete at the elite level. But even for kids, they don't have to. You join a boxing gym and just do a boxing class. You don't have to spar. You know, no one's ever going to force you to spar. And actually, a lot of gyms won't let you spar until you've been in there for at least 6 months. You know, yes, I think, you know, the combination of all those things, recognizing that boxing is very misunderstood. I want something that I want to wear to show people that I'm a boxer. And I think I can tell better stories and create better products than what's in the market right now. I was like, right, let's get after it. And there wasn't like the massive plan, you know, at the very start. It was very much, right, just let's jump into it. Yeah, it took me about 2 years to launch, get it off the ground. The car sales business was still running for 2 years into launch, keeping BOXRAW afloat. And it took about 2 years to get it off the ground and self-sustaining.
Wow. So Laura, just listening to Ben's story there, how would you go about explaining how common that is to kind of spot that opportunity in the market and hone in, and, you know, all the other brands that Ben mentioned? Is that kind of the best way to go about marketing a business in the early days?
It can be. I think there's two really key elements to it. The first is finding your niche, as you said, and having the really good understanding of that. But more importantly, what I was really listening to when you were talking then, Ben, is you understood the customer and really understand what motivates the customer and what they want, essentially. And so at the core of marketing, we talk about understanding customers' sort of needs or wants or their desires. And I think that is really key to finding not only the gap in the market and the niche, as it were, but also really understanding your customers and your potential customers. And if I may geek for a moment, what you were talking about then is sort of what you wear says something about who you are, your self-identity, which is so fundamentally important, particularly in this kind of business. But it was what we call conspicuous consumption. So people can see the brand you're wearing that you're identifying with, and it's saying something about not only who you are, but what the community that you belong to. And you're saying something very openly about your position in, say, society or in a particular group. And I thought that was really fascinating when you were sort of saying that, you know, you wanted to show people that you were a boxer, and you're proud to be a boxer. And I think that's really nice way of thinking about this, because you can tell the story around that. And when it comes to brand and thinking about how you communicate that and connect in with customers, that then becomes really powerful as a way of people connecting with the brand and with you as the founder, because founder stories are also, I'm sure you've found, really key as part of this as well.
Yeah, no, that's what got me as well. I was thinking about it was like you were channeling them, right? Because you wanted to be one and wanted to be seen, and then you were obviously working with them at the uni and they were all doing the same thing. So we often on this podcast talk with lots of different entrepreneurs at various stages. And I always ask, can anybody do it? And lots of people have stories like yours where, you know, they were having lots of other sort of little ideas and doing other bits and bobs in the business way. And then it was the kind of piece that connected with them most personally that was the one that they kind of followed through. So, I mean, what would you say? Can anyone be an entrepreneur? Like, how do you start a business?
I think everybody can be an entrepreneur, but I don't think everyone's willing to be one. I think they're two very distinct things. The amount of people that I mentor and friends that come to me for advice and even message me randomly asking for advice, and then they'll hit me back again in 6 months and they've given up or on the verge of giving up, and they're just not pushing hard enough. I think, from my own research and just being interested in the space of business, it's typically a lot of trauma that gets people into wanting to make that leap. And that trauma doesn't need to be like a deep, trauma, like a, death and so on. But it's either like them recognizing, one, that there's a huge gap because they're feeling that frustration themselves, or two, multiple failed attempts of, not wanting. For me, I got into business because of a very selfish reason. I just wanted to be able to fit in. When I got into the sweet selling business at school, it wasn't because I was thinking I need to make money because I want to do X, Y, and Z. It was because all my friends were buying sweets in school. I wanted to be able to afford sweets. I couldn't afford it. I used an emergency bus fund, which my mum gave me, 50 pence in my backpack, to buy some sweets one day. She didn't give them to me. I spent the money, went back. She hit me, said, look, we can't afford that. The next day I used that 50 pence to buy some sweets and resell them in class. And that was the idea. So for me, I only wanted to fuel that ambition. So even throughout school, when I was going into the blenders and so on, I wanted to be able to go to the cinema at the weekend. I wanted to be able to go on school trips. It was ice skating, it was buy the nice clothes, the pencil cases and things like that. I was always fueling an insecurity for myself. And I think there's there's probably more, reasons why, but for me, it was one, that initial insecurity, which I don't have anymore. And I really found myself with BOXRAW, but that was fueling that. And then with BOXRAW, it then became, actually, here's a problem I'm actually trying to solve. But the businesses I was in before then, they weren't deep-rooted problems. It was more opportunities of, I had a car sales business, so there was no passion in me selling cars, but I recognized there was a gap and I could make money there, and it would fuel, for me, what my motivation was at the time, which was to have nice clothes and cars and holidays and watches and things like that. But it was very empty. From my own research and just awareness of the space, I think, many business people go through that. First they're just trying to get things off the ground and make money, and they realize actually there's a higher calling and something that I actually want to do.
So when BOXRAW kind of occurred to you, then you're in that space and you're about to kind of take the first leap towards it. What in your mind did BOXRAW look like? Like, if you had to define it at that point, what was it then? Yeah,
it was tracksuits. The first product I wanted to look at was a tracksuit, ultimately. And the name was kind of there, but not in the initial instance. I knew it was going to be a boxing brand. BOXRAW was actually the name of a previous company I had, which is like a white collar boxing event company. And it was actually, a week or 2 weeks into ideating BOXRAW, the company itself, I couldn't think of a new name, so I carried on with BOXRAW. But it was always tracksuit first. And I had a lot of experience on Alibaba, so it was quite easy for me to jump on them, start speaking to Chinese suppliers, and start working on gear. I thought it would take me 3 months to launch. It's quite easy ordering a microwave, and it coming 30, 60 days later. I thought, okay, I'll do a tracksuit in 30 days, and in 2 months it will be here. I can start selling. I was very naive. It took 2 years.
Wow. And what was the first one like? How?
There's a lot of gear which essentially got scraps, which we then sent to Africa a few years later, to some of the charity gyms that we work with. But it was trash. I didn't know anything about clothing. I had no idea. I thought it was easy. I thought you just pick a hoodie and then say you put your logo on it. But I had to learn the hard way of having to measure things and give tech packs, which if people looked at what my tech pack was, back then, they'd laugh. But essentially, was it enough to be able to communicate what I wanted in the market. But I think that's another trait, for entrepreneurs, is that you don't need to have the grand figured out. You can just figure out, this is where I want to get to. We'll try our best to get to that point. Sometimes you put so much time into planning, it distracts from the actual execution, especially in those early days where you need to be fast or active.
So what would you say, Laura, about the way Ben has positioned BOXRAW and how, is that kind of contributed to the success of it?
Oh, 100%, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting brand. And as I was saying, the importance of connecting with customers, I think that's been a huge part of the success of the brand. And I think all the things that the brand stand for are so clear that, it's positioned really, really well.
So you've been, you launched 8 years ago, did you say?
2017, yeah.
2017. And so the world was a very different place in 2017. And I mean, it's probably not something that you could jump on Instagram and make an account for in 2017. So how did you actually go about the first stages of getting the word out and making the first sales?
So it was Instagram was around them, obviously, and it was a very different place. You know? It was very easy to contact boxers directly and slide into the DMs of champions and so on. But to start with, it was very much what I wanted this to be. No one had a clue we were a clothing brand. So for about 18 months, it was just this Instagram account, which by the time we launched had 20,000 followers. But I was exclusively posting like the nuances of a boxing gym. So talking about the actual mindset involved in the training camp, fight night. And it created this niche audience who really understood what I was talking about. So there's 20,000 followers, but those people were really, really interested in boxing. I post everything from, you know, reviews of fights to training camps of boxers. And then I have these burner accounts, which I comment on, start arguments with each other about boxing debates. And then suddenly the other communities are coming in now. They're starting to involve themselves in the debates. And by the time we launched, it was enough for me to step back and, you know, just kind of slowly start to run.
Amazing. And so is that, so today Instagram is a different space and there's obviously lots of reliance on it for brands, but it's not quite so. I mean, you mentioned you were able to just get in touch with some pretty big names in boxing to loop them in. That's not the case with social media now. What role does that play in marketing?
Well, there's a few things that have just rattled through my brain. First of all, one step that people miss is the importance of building your audience pre-launch. And I think that will have contributed hugely to your success because you will have built that community of people who have a natural interest in boxing. And so when you were ready to launch, you had a captive warm audience, as it were. And a lot of people miss the importance of that build in terms of your audience. It's not that you can't do the two in parallel, in tandem, but you know, if you don't have a warm audience, you can't sell, essentially. So that's really important when it comes to social media. With the kind of celebrity endorsement space, it's a really interesting one because social media broke down barriers, but it also put more up in some ways. So it's a really interesting space to be in. And we've seen the rise of micro-influencers as well. So people with sort of smaller followings, but actually having the ability to convert into sales amongst their smaller audience more powerfully than people who've got sort of a gigantic audience, but not sort of that community element. So that's one thing. And I think as well, customers are sometimes a bit more skeptical around this idea of people endorsing brands. And obviously with the legislation change where everything has to be declared and transparent, that was really great in some ways, but it also has meant that customers turn a blind eye to that kind of endorsement. So there's some really interesting nuances. I think the transparency is a great thing. And I think customers are also very skeptical. So if you feel as a customer that somebody's endorsing a brand and it's clearly just another one in their roster of brands that they endorse and it's not sort of an authentic endorsement, or they don't necessarily use that brand, or it's not something that they would automatically engage with, they're just doing it because they're paid to. Customers are really savvy to that.
Just thinking about the Love Island eras, you know, when they come off and every other week it's something else that they're pushing, and the ads left, right and centre, and none of it has any kind of cohesion or doesn't ring true with who they are.
And I think from what I've seen on the social accounts for you guys, that authentic connection with the brand absolutely holds true. And so it has that sort of, again, adds into that community feel and space, which people enjoy. I mean, it's you know, celebrity endorsement in the classical sense isn't new, and it's just moved into the social media area, and it's slightly more nuanced now. But I think it's about that authenticity of connection that is really key to it being successful, which is something that I'm sure you found during your time of working with people who have sort of an elevated status in the boxing arena.
Yeah, and it's like you built the community before you tried to sell them anything as well. 20,000 beforehand, all knowing kind of what they're there for and sharing the same interest.
Most people thought we were a gym.
Yeah.
Just had a coming soon page with boxing content behind it.
So tell me a little bit more then about arguing with yourself in the comments, because I like the idea of this. So you have different accounts.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be anything about this boxer is the greatest boxer of all time. I come in, no, this boxer is a better boxer, you know, and then within, you know, hours, you then got the boxers chiming in on what they think. And then I'm arguing with some of our followers just to keep conversations going. You know, nothing aggressive or to the point where people don't or detract from the community, but enough to keep discussions going. And then people feeling like this is a place where actual boxers hang out. So yeah, I kind of had to fake it before we made it.
No, it's really interesting though, isn't it, to kind of generate that conversation and the opportunity to do that under these different names, because I suppose there's a huge space in comments and reviews and interactions and stuff that has also got clouded in present, I guess, with the, you know, those AI review things and how they've got bots that can now leave 5 stars on things. And so people are generally more suspicious of feedback in that way. But what about comments? I mean, that's clever.
Yes, the comments are actually where a lot of the gold will happen in terms of that community build and those connections with other people. And people will, you know, the more you can comment and start sort of replying to one another, people actually will form online friendships in that regard in some of those spaces. It's interesting you mentioned AI, because I see this a lot on LinkedIn, and obviously that's a more business oriented platform, but you can see the comments miles off, you know, particularly on LinkedIn where there's a bot that's you know, responding in the comments. I say it's like AI bots running around on LinkedIn all the time. And I think we are going to see more of that. But also I think people will call it out more because people become hyper aware of it. And people get quite protective of a space. So if there are people where they're sort of having a good time talking to one another in the comments or debating issues, or there's something that they're naturally interested in, then it kind of will sort itself out in some ways, I think, I hope, I suppose. But I always say when I sort of run LinkedIn training with people, and again, that's sort of the platform I'm using the most at the moment, you know, you don't always have to post. You know, your way into getting comfortable with social media is often in the comments. So, you know, trying to comment, and people get a bit shy, I think, in terms of knowing what to say, and it doesn't have to be forced. Comments are sort of, they don't have to be bold or controversial, but it is a way to sort of build your social media presence yourself. If you're somebody who's an entrepreneur or wants to get involved with social media more, rather than feeling like you have to post all the time, sort of a way in is using the comments and looking at what people are talking about. Because the other thing that I'm sure you will have found, Ben, is reading the comments, looking at what people are saying, what they're talking about, again, gives you that depth of understanding about your customers as well, and your potential customers, and what they care about, which again can fuel your strategy in terms of your marketing and what you want to put out there as well. So it's kind of self-fulfilling in that regard as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? So you start your boxing journey off by talking about that community that you were working with. And then when it comes to BOXRAW, you built the community before you tried to sell them anything, and you're very kind of engaged. And still, that's where your socials remain, isn't it? It's with like representation of that community.
We don't have any more fake accounts.
No.
Better accounts now. Honestly, it kind of just runs itself. But yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we touched there on the resilience piece. And so, you know, the challenges with running a business, with boxing, with anything really, and how you push through those. Do you know anyone that's just released a book on resilience?
Well, funny you should mention it, Brian. Yes, I have. I've just written and published a book called Brilliantly Bouncy, which is about positive resilience. So it's a fresh take on resilience. A lot of people who've researched resilience and who think and talk about resilience look at it very much from this idea of something really negative having to happen in order to build your resilience. And the work that I've been doing around positive resilience is based on the idea that we can all build our resilience in manageable ways in our everyday lives so that it's there to call upon when we need it. It's a bit of a strange idea when you think about it logically, that we only think about our resilience when something goes wrong. And if you try and build your resilience when something has gone wrong or life's thrown you a bit of a curveball, you're already depleted. So my idea is trying to help people to understand how they can build their resilience in their daily lives so that when they need to call on it, it's there. So I use the analogy of a dimmer switch on a lamp. So resilience isn't something that you just sort of switch on or switch off. It's something that's always there, that you can turn up when you need it and then turn it back down again. But the idea of the lamp is really powerful because the lamp needs electricity. And so it's really focusing on how you can have that kind of source of resilience all the time. And I think the sports and boxing side of things really speaks into that, because when you were just talking about the idea that, you know, all through your life, what boxing sort of taught you in the training and all that kind of stuff, it's exactly the same kind of idea. You have to put the work in order to be able to fight as a boxer. And it's kind of the same with the resilience in many ways. And when often I talk to people about resilience and I ask people what resilience means to them, it's bouncing back from adversity, it's facing life's challenges, and actually it doesn't have to be all shrouded in negativity. I can't stop the bad stuff from happening, of course, in life, but it's just a fresh way of thinking about our resilience, particularly as well is because we're seeing it as a prized skill in the workplace. And so the World Economic Forum, for example, in their 2030 report have said that resilience is going to be something that's really important for all of us to have at work. And so it's generally a life skill as well, I think. So it's something that I would encourage everybody to think about.
And so if you think about boxing as a metaphor for resilience, then I suppose at its simplest, how many times you can be punched in the face and be okay, I guess. I mean, but can someone be resilient if they've never been punched in the face?
Absolutely. Well, I think about resilience not in terms of bouncing back, because my fundamental problem with that idea is that you're bouncing back to where you were before. And if you've needed to be resilient, something's changed. So you don't actually want to go back to where you were before. I also don't like this idea of bouncing forward because that feels like an unrelenting momentum that's exhausting. So the reason I called the book Brilliantly Bouncy is because I'm really encouraging people to find their own unique way of bouncing. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be attached to this idea that a catastrophe or a big curveball has to happen in order to be resilient. We all have our own definition of resilience and what that means to us and our circumstances. And so it's not just about weathering storms. It's about, like I said, leaning into our strengths and understanding who we are and how we want to kind of operate as human beings. So I want to uncouple from this idea of actually you are only resilient if you've been punched in the face, to use the metaphor. We can all be resilient in lots of different ways, and that can then manifest in thinking about our relationships with other people and the way in which we operate at work, how we have friendships, all of these kind of things that happen in life. Our resilience can fuel those and can help other people as well, which is really nice.
So the bit, I suppose, that got me about your book ahead of today's conversation is the section about being like an athlete. And it's a muscle that you have to kind of work on. And again, that kind of rang true in the things I've seen about, I mean, anything to do with starting a business, number one, but then also the boxing and the regime and the routine and the commitment in that way. How would you define resilience? What does it mean to kind of you in your space?
I think you've highlighted some very good points there about resilience doesn't only need to come from just negatives that happen. For me, like, just the hardest thing that I do on a daily basis is waking up in the morning, especially if I haven't slept much the night before. That internal battle that I go through on a daily basis, and I mean daily, if I can overcome that and actually wake up when I need to wake up and get to boxing, running, start boxing, whatever the morning session is, that's for me like the hardest thing I'm going to do that day, which then sets the day up for success. Afterwards, like when bad things are happening, I know I've already made that huge win. So I think what's very important is people set themselves the hard things to do and make sure they consistently achieve them. That in itself builds mental resilience, mental toughness,
Yeah, and just work through it, as you set out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that you're both planners. You both answered that one really quite quickly, and you like to have a plan and like to follow that plan. Do you think that plays a part here? Because you're kind of managing yourself in a way then.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think plans need to necessarily be rigid. It's this idea of knowing where you're going. And I really like what you were saying there about, the hardest bit of my day is getting up. But there's something there about the consistency of it. And so when, you asked as well in the early section, early bird or night owl, and I said I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to write. That's right now in this season of my life, that's what works for me. I mean, thinking back to 2017, I got married in 2017. So that's a date that just struck me when you said you founded your business and I got married. So if I think about 2017, Laura, if I said I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I would have been like, you were insane. That's never, ever going to happen. I have young children, but that 2 hours before my kids wake up is my creative time. When they're older, so my children are 5 and nearly 2, when they're older, that's not going to be the right time for me. But writing is so important to me and what I do that I really enjoy it and I want to get out of bed in the morning to do that. If I was thinking, I'll get up at 4 o'clock to like answer my emails or do some kind of administrative task that I don't really relish doing, I would not be getting out of bed in the morning. And the only way that I can do it is to be consistent with it. And I think there's something there around consistency, which you've found as well. And I think, again, sort of you talked about knowing your purpose and what you really want to do. I'm motivated to do that because I really like that work. And so there's that bit about knowing yourself as well. And I work on the principles of energy management, not time management, because I can't create more time. And my time is now restricted. Now I have children in a way that it wasn't previously. So I don't work beyond 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I shut down my computer, I go, and that's when I'm in mum mode. And I do go to bed early to facilitate me getting up early, which is probably quite boring. And I have a very understanding and wonderful husband, long suffering, bless him. But again, I'm not saying that this is forever, and that's what's really important as well. Is like you can plan, but you can also flex and know what's right for you at a particular point in time. But I think being intentional does not have to be restrictive. You can still flex and be intentional, and I think that's the key distinction that I would make around that.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And so when we're thinking about having that intent and making plans and following up on that resilience piece, let's apply that to BOXRAW for a moment. You have demonstrated the brand's got its own resilience. It's got the community, it's got the following, and it's grown into something that's cross. I mean, you mentioned your charity stuff earlier, and so I'm quite interested to hear about where you see BOXRAW going. Have you got any sort of big plans for it in the future? Like, what's next?
Yeah, I want to own the boxing ecosystem. Right? I want to become an authority across the entire ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, I mean not just apparel and equipment. People look at us as just t-shirts, hoodies, tracksuits, and so on. For me, it's about products and services within the boxing space. I mean, we've got a business called BOXRAW Labs. It's been working on for about 4 years now, which is a completely different field. And people, when they hear about it for the first time, are like, you've got this clothing company, and why are you working on AI now? But for me, it's about, I take everything back to our vision, right? I hold the vision at the top, which is to be the reason why the world got into boxing. Now, I can only do that to a certain extent with the clothing, apparel, and equipment, right? I can sell that to certain people that can afford to buy it. We can have a charity that can help gift that stuff out to people that can't. But I'm still limited there. If I really want to be the reason why the world got into boxing, I have to change the narrative of boxing and allow people to understand it more than they do right now. So we developed AI, computer vision, which tracks biomechanical data of boxers and essentially collects all that data, uses it for boxers for performance improvements and pattern recognition, but also for broadcasters so they can understand what people can understand what they're consuming on TV, to actually display what the science is of boxing. So when I think about the overall vision for boxing, I want to be the authority within the boxing space. For too long, it's been grandfathered, with no one really trying to change it and elevate it. And for me, I've seen some big gaps with the apparel, equipment, technology, in the event space, try and bring more people into boxing and unite the community. Exactly what that looks like in 10, 15 years, I know enough now to know that you can have the biggest goal and plan, but Mike Tyson says it, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and we've been punched in the face at BOXRAW many times, which just course corrected us. But what I do know is that we are going to be the biggest apparel equipment company in boxing, providing the best quality gear for boxers. From a technology standpoint, we're going to be reducing the barriers to understanding fans so they can understand what they consume. For boxers, for performance improvements, and then from a charitable perspective, we'll be taking boxing to areas of the world where, and we are, we're taking it to areas of the world where otherwise they would never have access to the sport. So yeah, BOXRAW is boxing and the evolution of
it. So guys, it's time for the bottom line today. So if we can have a little think about if you wanted one thing that you might want a person in the audience to take away from our conversations today. Laura, what do you think it would be for you?
I think there's a lot to be said around that idea of discipline and the power of practice, and obviously linking into the ideas around resilience that we've talked about, not just thinking about resilience in terms of bouncing back from adversity, but how actually you can sort of be intentional and build your resilience. And I think it applies to everybody, whether you want you're an entrepreneur or a leader. And I think there's a lot to think about in terms of, the using boxing as an analogy to sort of think about how we can all become more resilient ourselves.
I think I'd probably add on to what you're talking about there in terms of building that resilience is chase the hard things, figure out some non-negotiables each day or a non-negotiable each day, which is hard, and it's going to be hard, but you know that once you've achieved it, you're going to feel better about it. You're going to callous your mind, callous your brain, for those tough times in the future. And, from my observations of the world we live in today is that people aren't mentally tough enough because they don't bake in these small habits, which they can try and chase. And yes, they're going to be hard, but very quickly they're forgotten. And you've done it.
I know, it's really interesting. Great. Thank you both for your time today. I've really enjoyed our chat. And so we've discussed all sorts of things, the fights within entrepreneurship, the power of marketing, and the resilience that it takes to succeed. So again, thank you both, Ben and Laura, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Lead Out Loud. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the conversation, why not subscribe over here to get all the best content from Warwick Business School? And don't forget to catch up on every episode of Lead Out Loud over here.